Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, listeners. This is your host, Andy Curry. Today, I am fired up because I have with me Carol Fredrickson. Carol has been speaking for 23 years, and the content she speaks on is fascinating, which is workplace violence, conflict in the workplace, and personal safety. Carol speaks primarily in the U.S., but also not primarily, but she also speaks internationally as well. I beg your pardon. Carol is based out of Arizona, and Carol, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on, Andy.
We're delighted to have you with us. Carol, tell us about the talks that you're giving. Who are you talking to? How are you helping them? What are you teaching them?
Well, my audiences really vary. There's a large span. I would say my niche is the subject matter as opposed to a particular arena that I speak in. I speak for a lot of public utilities lately. I've spoken a lot in healthcare, a lot in the insurance industry, really everything from Fortune 50 companies to somewhat small organizations, national, international associations. It really varies.
Okay. It's interesting, the types of companies you're telling me you're speaking to. Are they experiencing violence in the workplace, or are you educate like the healthcare industry? Are you talking to them about it because they have it in their workspace, or are you telling them about it so they can see what's coming into them and why it's happening?
Well, it's interesting that you point out healthcare because that is probably the number one profession, at least in the United States, where we are seeing a huge amount of workplace violence and people are constantly being hurt.
Really?
I get calls probably weekly from the healthcare industry. We have nurses who are assaulted in the ER. We have gang violence, gang eruptions in the ER. We have disputes and conflict. You bring a family who perhaps has had, let's say they've had a child who's been in a car accident. They come into the ER. They're very emotional. They're wrapped up in this situation. They don't know whether their child is going to live or not. It's one of the worst days of their lives. They end up getting into conflict with the other driver's family. They think it's that person's fault. So conflicts are constantly erupting in the ER. But besides that, you've got situations where within the workplace, let's say you could have a patient with a traumatic brain injury. You could have even a 15-year-old, 16-year-old male, say, with a traumatic brain injury. They can become very violent with their nurse. Not that it's really intentional on their part, but it's a part of the actual brain injury. We have people in long-term care facilities who are dealing with folks with Alzheimer's, and very often they can become violent. And besides just the actual physical violence, we've got the psychological threats. We're seeing it in workplaces basically right across the nation. There really isn't anyone who isn't susceptible to workplace violence. Some more than others, certainly any kind of 24-hour, convenience store, gas station, that type of thing, or any place that handles money, banks, that kind of thing. They're going to see a little bit higher rate of workplace violence. But I see it within manufacturing, car dealerships, you name it, there's workplace violence.
So what is your role? Do you go in and help them learn how to diffuse it, prevent it, deal with it? What do you do exactly?
Absolutely. I would probably wrap it up by saying that I help the company to reduce their risk, to limit their liability, and to keep their people safe. And obviously, one of those ways is to determine what the red flags and what the warning signs of violence are. After the fact, we can go in, we can do consulting, we can help them out. We'll get a lot of panic calls from a company that maybe has to do a high-risk termination, or they have an active threat, and they're really not sure how to investigate it. Is it real? Is it fake? Should they deal with it? What do they do? How do they assess the risk? Are the warning signs there? In other words, could this person become ballistic? Could they bring a gun into the workplace? Could they start shooting? So there certainly is work to be done on that and during a situation or even the aftermath. But primarily, my interest is in educating people beforehand, because after a serious workplace violence incident, we can go in and always will be able to find anywhere from 5 to maybe a dozen signs of workplace violence that no one recognized. And what happens is that individually, let's say one supervisor sees one thing, and on its own, it may not be that significant. So they don't necessarily do anything about it. They don't report it to human resources. Well, maybe another day, a couple weeks, few weeks later, another supervisor sees something. And again, on its own, it maybe is not a significant issue. We'll have this happen 3, 4, maybe even 5 times. And then what happens is it goes ignored, and this person becomes ballistic, they get hostile, they may physically abuse someone else, and we could have prevented it had we known. Had any of those 5, 6, 10 people reported that to human resources, well, something would have been done. They would have interfered, they would have taken action, perhaps gotten employee assistance involved, a variety of different things that they can do if they become aware. So if companies have a workplace violence policy in place, if they have it set up so that employees understand what to look for, they know the warning signs and the red flags of violence, they know who to report it to, then it's much, much easier because all the reports go to one person. Let's say that's the head of HR. And that person, they see all 4, 5, 6 warning signs. They know that they need to take action upon it, where each individual supervisor may not recognize that what they've seen is part of a bigger picture.
So what are some warning signs? They're pretty common among, just wherever someone's working? Is that pretty common, the warning signs?
I think they are. The problem around it is that we don't really know what to look for. And warning signs, what I usually teach people is to concentrate on a pattern of behavior. Is there a major change in their work habits or their performance? Is there an increase in their tardiness or absences, or perhaps their inability to concentrate? An abrupt or sustained change of attitude can simply be an indicator that an employee is experiencing some kind of difficulty in their life. For instance, you might have a person who's normally bubbly, friendly, who suddenly becomes withdrawn, uncooperative, or even belligerent. They might become an excessive whiner or a complainer, even morally righteous, distrustful, suspicious. So what we're looking for is not necessarily just one thing, but it's kind of a combination of red flags and warning signs, as well as past and personal history that become the predictors of workplace violence. And along with that, we have to determine what the risk is. So to do a proper risk assessment, it's a much larger, bigger issue that usually needs a team of people to assess and/or a professional to be brought in. But it can be romantic obsessions that are gone bad. It can be persons, very often, let me give you an example. Very often it could be a personal problem. So it might be a relationship. They might be going through a messy divorce or an ugly child custody battle. Maybe someone in their family is having an affair. Maybe they just found out their 13-year-old daughter is pregnant. It could be extreme financial issues. Maybe they have a family member who has cancer and their resources, their money is just, they're stretched to the wall because of all of the extras that they have to pay for, the out-of-pocket expenses. They come into work, their work has been failing. They're not concentrating as well at work. They're almost on the brink. So violence, we find, often erupts from people that are in a horrible situation that they just don't know how to handle. So they may become physically explosive or verbally explosive to their supervisor at work, and it really doesn't have to do as much with what's going on at work as it does all of the stress from their personal life. So the personal life really spills into the workplace. It's a little tricky to determine and predict the behavior of someone, and there's multiple different things that play into that. You know, are they paranoid? Is their behavior disconnected? Have they made previous threats? And I can give you different examples from some pretty, if you will, I hate to use the word famous, but well-known is probably a better term, well-known workplace violence incidents around the United States.
Well, please do.
And we go back and we look. I can think of one off the top of my head, and that was the first shooting at Fort Hood in Texas. There was 13 people killed there. There was 32 others wounded. And the former director of the FBI was tasked to head an inquiry about Major Nadel Hassan, who was the shooter in that incident, and found that there was a lack of actions on the military, that there was all kinds of red flags that were missed during his time at Walter Reed. A lot of his students and faculty described his behavior as disconnected, aloof, paranoid. He was in fear of being deployed, so much so that he wanted to pay the Army back for his education. Well, you can't get out of the military by paying them back for your education. But even with all of those red flags that were seen, there still wasn't a report put in, and there was no action taken prior to that.
Interesting. What about James Holmes, the theater shooter in Denver? Do you know of any of the actions that led up to that?
Well, yes, but here's the problem with a situation like Holmes. The people in the movie theater, there's no way the employers or the employees at the movie theater would have any idea about him.
Right.
He had past mental health issues. His family obviously saw that. People who are closest to someone may recognize that there's mental health issues, but again, they don't know how severe they are. Mm-hmm. Nobody thinks that someone they love or care about could do something as horrific as that. So when you're talking about a public setting, i.e. a movie theater or where someone walks into a McDonald's and starts shooting with an Uzi submachine gun, it's very, very difficult for us to reduce that risk and to prepare for that stranger walking in.
Now, I was thinking as you're talking a little bit ago, has there ever been a case, and I'm sure there has, of someone who was just meek and just exploded over time, and there was workplace violence? Does any come to mind?
Yes, there's been several cases all over the U.S. that I can think of where an employee was bullied. They were put down, they were abused mentally, psychologically, and over a period of time, they may be meek, they may be mild-mannered, but over a period of time, they internalize all that negativity, all of that hate, all of that anger. They don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And there have been situations where perhaps that employee has left the employee of that company, or they've been terminated, and they have come back and then shot and killed either the person who bullied them, their boss, if that was the person involved, but they often will come back and they specifically will target someone.
Have you seen a lot of that, or not really?
I wouldn't say a lot, but it is certainly something of concern. There is an issue, and certainly it comes up when I'm teaching workplace violence and prevention, that we treat these people with a deal of respect. Even if we have to terminate someone for just cause, there's a way of doing it in a very, very respectful manner. And that's more important, is how the person feels about you and about the company. If they feel respected, they may understand, they may even acknowledge what they did wrong that led to the termination, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just furious about the termination, but it seems if it's handled with respect and with dignity, they do a lot better. It's when they aren't treated respectfully, it's not handled well, I can think of a particular situation. Of course, it did involve mental illness in the Minneapolis area a couple of years ago with a small sign company. And it was, I believe there was only 24 employees there. And they had an employee who'd been with them approximately 17 years, if I remember correctly. And he had some signs of mental illness that everyone knew about, and they kept giving him leeway and more leeway and more leeway. They knew that he probably needed to be terminated, but they didn't want to have to deal with the American with Disabilities Act. They didn't have an HR staff. They didn't have anyone on hand acting as an HR person. And they finally decided that after multiple complaints from fellow employees, the CEO decided to terminate him. Unfortunately, everything about it was handled incorrectly, and the CEO had called him that particular day, told the employee to be in his office an hour or so later, and the employee went out, got his gun out of the vehicle, and came in. I believe it was 12 people that he killed, so 50% of the employees.
Oh, my goodness sake.
Including the CEO and the CFO, and that would be an example of all the indicators were there. What they needed to do was hire a psychologist, a forensic psychologist, to help do a risk assessment, to hire a safety consultant. They needed to hire an HR specialist, even their lawyer, and a combination of these people together to decide how was best to terminate this employee, both in a legal manner and in a dignified, morally correct manner.
You know, hearing all that you've said, and I totally understand and get that, but as a business owner, if I had 20 employees, 50, whatever, I would be reluctant to go through all that. So, and I'm sure you've come across that, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
What do you tell them? What do you say?
You know, it's simply a risk. Very often what I say to them is, how are you going to feel if tomorrow, the next day, or next week, this employee shoots and kills members of your close-knit staff, and you live with yourself? 9 times out of 10, they will take some action. Whether it's what I've suggested or not is a different story, but most of them will take some form of action.
Well, it seems to me, and maybe it's the media that seems to make it worse, but it just seems that kind of thing is getting worse and worse.
It is. It's definitely on the increase. I will say this, though. The media picks up on the stories that are huge, the active shooter stories, the stories where it ends up with someone being dead. What we see the majority of in the workplaces today are harassment, threats, bullying. So it's all there. It's conflict. Sometimes it's personality conflicts that get out of hand, but it's usually that type of situation. It's not normally the active shooter. Most businesses and most of us will go through our lifetime and never see that or experience that. But pretty much every audience that I'm in front of, I will ask them at the beginning, have you ever experienced workplace violence? And if I have, say, 75 to 100 people in the audience, I'll get anywhere from 3 to maybe half a dozen hands. I ask them the same question after the training, and invariably almost every hand in the audience is up. They just don't realize that it's workplace violence. And unfortunately, a lot of people now are dealing with stuff in the workplace, this kind of conflict and nasty behavior, people yelling, bosses feeling that it's okay to psychologically attack and berate their employees, and they think it's okay.
Interesting. Well, shoot, Carol, that's a fascinating topic. I've never talked with anybody about that before. There's a lot of negativity in it. How do you manage the negativity part so it doesn't get to you?
I keep the programs fun and light. I tell people to come to the programs, and we're going to cover a serious topic, but expect to laugh, expect to have fun. I'm an expert on adult education and how adults learn. So it's a little bit of parent sharing, it's stories, it's working in groups. We laugh at our own behavior. I do programs on managing angry people in the workplace, and it's a lot of emotional awareness. How do we show up? How do we contribute? I ask people to look in the mirror. How are they a part of the problem that they're trying to solve? What role do they play? What triggers their hot buttons? I'll ask them, take it out of the workplace. Think of it home. Think of the last person who made you really, really, really angry or really, really pissed off. How did you feel? What happened? And we start discovering and understanding our own emotions and what trigger our emotions. Once we're able to do that, then it becomes much easier to de-escalate the conflict and not take things personally. So when I speak with audiences, I customize the program. So, for instance, public utilities that I've been working with lately, it's a combination of de-escalating angry people because they shut off their utilities for non-payment. It's personal safety. They have to go out sometimes and read meters in rural areas where they still have meters at homes and homeowners come out with a gun. What do they do if they're faced with a gun? How do they respond? How do they react? So I keep it fun by understanding the specific nature of their workplace violence issues and their conflict, and make it a combination of all the programs that I talk about. So my programs are very, very interactive, and people love that. They love being part of the solution.
Okay. Well, Carol, thank you so much for letting us know about this. This is very good information everyone should know, frankly. And if someone wants you to speak, wants to know more, how do they contact you?
Easiest way is to probably look at the website, which is www.violence-free.com.
Okay. Well, Carol, thank you again for sharing your information with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, Andy.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.